Story 1. There exists on this planet a predator so perfect that it has not had to evolve in any major way for over 150 million years. It has existed in its current basic design for longer than there has been a human species. They don't even need to hunt, just wait for prey to stupidly blunder into their path, then injects a venom that literally liquefies the internal organs. F you spiders. Story 2. The Fermi Paradox. The conditions to support life are extremely common in the universe, so radio silence can mean a few things. Most civilizations die out due to their own actions. Most civilizations are hiding due to a few that will preemptively attack anyone foolish enough to reveal their location. There exists an inhibitor race that destroys all civilizations that advance to a certain level. Physical limits on technology do not allow long-range travel or communication. We live under a net blocking outside communication and are being observed. We live in a simulation. None of those possibilities is comforting. Story 3. Look at your hands. A significant percentage of the atoms that make up your hands and everything else in your body were forged in the heart of stars, which then exploded. We, as in our atoms, were not in the stars, so much as we were the stars themselves. We're all remnants of long-dead stars. Stars like our sun are pretty much our grandchildren. We were stars, and then we were supernovas. It's funny to realize that our bodies were once pieces of something that overwhelmingly powerful. Story 4. The movie Contagion. The fact that it's actually a fairly realistic presentation of how a virus could spread throughout our planet and the efforts it takes for a cure to come about. Kind of a nutshell. But you get a virus that continent hops, infects people who can die within 72 hours, and it takes governments 4 months to even get to a test-worthy cure, which isn't meant for mass consumption at that time. The amount of death during that timeline is ridiculous. And in general, the fact that every human being on this planet could eventually be killed by something we can't even see but with a microscope is mind-bending. Then, to add to that, the idea of an asteroid or meteorite crashing into Earth, which happens to contain organic material from another planet that could have potentially supported some form of life. But that organic material is enough to contain a virus within our ecosystem and infect people is crazy. Or there are a handful of viruses so hot only a few live versions exist in very locked-down laboratories in multiple countries, I believe like smallpox. Granted, the United States I think has over 300 million cures for it if an outbreak were to spread, but it is still scary as crap that could somehow, someday get released. Story 5. The scale of the universe and its emptiness, yet how much there is out there, are both insane. It's terrifying yet amazing at the same time. Take a square millimeter, or basically a grain of sand, place a meter, or about a yard, or 3 feet, away from you. If there wasn't anything blocking your view, that grain of sand would be covering thousands of entire galaxies from your view. This is what the ultra-deep field from Hubble represents. The light from those galaxies took so much time to get here, that when it left those galaxies, our solar system didn't even exist for another 8-9 billion years or so. But that's not just one spot in one direction. It surrounds us in every direction. You could place that grain of sand anywhere around you, and it would have the same effect.
Story 6.
No one knows exactly how general anesthesia works to render someone unconscious. Also, no one knows why people die from anesthesia, although this complication is rare. Which is why I refuse to be put under for anything, because I'm convinced I'll be one of those rare deaths from it. I was put under for the first time ever a few months ago for surgery on a badly broken arm. I fought the F out of it, conceptually, existentially. When it came right down to it, though, I did end up shocked about one thing. I felt like I was making the choice to go to sleep, to just lay my head to the side, the same as when I'm at home and ate too much salty food and I'm just peaceful and lazy. And it felt exactly the same as drifting off like that on a lazy afternoon. In those moments when I was drifting off, I understood that what was happening wasn't just about being put under, but it was about fear of death. In my life, before and since that surgery, I haven't experienced fear of danger, it's a strange quirk of mine, for at least 10 years. But in the days leading up to my surgery, I did very much experience a dread of inviting the darkness, of allowing an anesthesiologist to pull me toward a state indistinguishable, for me, from obliteration. I know the rational part of me was tricked, just a bit, by the anti-anxiety meds they gave me an hour before surgery, but those didn't stop me from thinking and seeing that I could trust that experience. Whatever the reason, whatever they gave me, or my state of mind just before I went to sleep, I think it's by design that I felt like I made the choice for lights out. That's the way the anesthesia works, or at least the way it worked for me, and I think it was a great gift to my sense of being in the world to have experienced it. Story 7. The fact that we could get hit with a solar flare at any time, which has the potential to send us back into the 18th century. An entire hemisphere of the Earth could have all of its electronic equipment wiped out. Just imagine the consequences of such an event. A solar flare hit the US in the mid-19th century. Fortunately at the time, It was only the telegraph system that was affected since there weren't any electronic systems in place at the time. Telegraph lines were reported to burst into flames. It terrifies me to think what would happen if this happened to us. Living in a world dependent on electronics and electronic systems, it could be one of the most catastrophic events in history. Also, it's not like it'll be a short outage like after a bad storm or hurricane hits. It would take many months, or even years, to bring us back to where we were. The scarier part is the human reaction. Just look at what happens to communities when the power goes out for a day or two, like New York in 1977. Now just imagine that for an entire hemisphere. And keep in mind, we're 1,000 times more dependent on electronic systems now than we were in 1977. And it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Story 8, Gamma Ray Bursts. That's some scary crap. There was a supernova that happened 8,000 light years from Earth that was observed a few decades ago, I think. Supernovas fire off two gamma ray bursts in completely random directions, directly opposite each other when they happen. If one of the bursts from that supernova had just happened to hit Earth, it would have wiped out 70% of life on the planet in 10 seconds. A gamma ray burst could be heading towards Earth right now, and we would have no possible way to know because they approach at the speed of light. Story 9. Consciousness as an emergent property of the brain, hands down. It's part philosophy, part science. Well, philosophy that's consistent with scientific observation. Most people just assume our mind just exists somewhere. That somewhere being as a non-corporeal, undetectable entity inhabiting our body, as in a soul, or floating somewhere else looking inward. Maybe some will think of it as interchangeable with the brain, but that's still not quite accurate. Consider the more likely fact that we are just the summation of the brain's activities. That we, our minds, do not exist in a technical sense. It is raining, but not rain. We are talking, but not speaking. We are math, but not numbers. We are the verb to the noun that is our brain. This has some interesting implications. When you couple this with hard determinism, you get the concept of humans as complex natural forces. I'm posting this here because I was introduced to this by listening to Skeptic's Guide to the Universe with an interview. I wish I could relocate about the subject. Without a doubt, I'm stepping over the bounds of what is strictly scientific fact, but I think it's the most freaky thing I've ever encountered with reasonable scientific backing. Story 10. Studies have found it is likely conscious decisions are not a factor in our actions, and that we create post hoc reasonings for the things we do. From early psychological theories to more modern MRI tests, the concept of free will is gradually moving from being seen as a mystery to being seen as an illusion. People can give false reasons, or even convince themselves they carried out actions they did not, and swear blindly that they did. They aren't lying, they genuinely believe this and recall it that way. This fact is especially scary for me because it makes you see everything going on in the real world in terms of this idea. Meaning the truly insane decisions being taken by certain people may not be influenced by logic as we know it at all. It raises the question of whether consciousness is truly real or necessary. Story 11. That all our senses are just waves converted into electric signals and then processed by our brain. But most of the time when the brain doesn't receive any signal, he just makes them up, and sometimes your brain decides to forget stuff or create memories. So basically a big part of your life were just hallucinations made up by your brain. Maybe your mom or friend you see every week does not exist and died years ago, but your brain just decided to forget about that and makes you think they are still alive. Story 12. Memory transference in organ transplant recipients. I read somewhere that a man got a heart from a recently deceased, who committed suicide by putting a bullet through his head. After the man received the heart transplant a while later, he went into his backyard, pulled out a shotgun, and put a bullet through his head the same way his donor did. Also wanted to mention that he did not know his donor, nor how he passed. Excerpt from Google search. The behaviors and emotions acquired by the recipient from the original donor are due to the combinatorial memories stored in the neurons of the donated organ. Heart transplants are said to be the most susceptible to cell memory, where organ transplant recipients experienced a change of heart. Story 13. The idea that we may have missed the window to fully understand the universe. Example of the kind of window I'm talking about. We understand our place in the universe and a lot of physics by looking at not just stars but other galaxies, how they move, what they do, etc. However, with the universe expanding, there will come a time when galaxies move so far apart that they are no longer inside the visible universe, and hence will be undetectable. Any sentient life at that time will be able to see only their own galaxy's stars, and a lot of information on the true nature of the universe will be forever unobtainable. It's entirely possible that several such windows of opportunity to understand the true nature of reality have already closed, and we will never know they even existed in the first place. Our base ability to understand what reality really is may have already become physically impossible. Story 14. That evolution happened due to randomness. If matter can self-assemble into working intellect, It follows that we will eventually learn to organize matter into working intellect. Probably the first of this will be AI. Some people wonder if hard or strong AI is possible. With evolution and history as a guide, I can't shake the idea that it is not only inevitable, but closer than many people think. That should scare the crap out of everyone. If corporations developing AI are known for anything, it is being out of touch with ethics. So we could essentially be creating AI in an environment where the ethics surrounding it are about control and our own fears of being destroyed. We should be employing ethics at maximum to develop these ideas, but they seem so far-fetched, no one gives a damn. Because we keep telling ourselves it is impossible, we will end up more likely creating an AI that hates us, and as Hollywood has shown, we barely make it out alive. Story 15. All of time has already happened, and your experience of time is just a matter of how small you are and how slowly you move. Since time is relative to the velocity and gravity from which it is observed, all of time has already been observed from somewhere. Brian Greene described it as a loaf, which could be cut at infinite angles, the angle of the cut being the velocity and whatnot. Since time is a loaf, and not some strange constantly baking bread machine, from some angle, at some speed, every single moment, past and future, has already happened. Story 16. This one's a bit hypothetical, but bear with me. There's a philosopher called Nick Bostrom who posits that we have the ability and inclination to create simulated universes, like video games. And, like video games, technology keeps evolving, as does artificial intelligence. In theory, we'll eventually create a universe with simulated beings so real that they'll not only believe that they're real, but given the inclination and ability, will eventually create their own simulated universe. In short, the inhabitants of every simulation will eventually create another simulation, barring an event that prevents said inhabitants from reaching that stage in their development, such as an extinction event. Where this gets creepy is that if you accept his theory as true, then the chances of us being the prime universe are astronomical. Not just 1,000,000 to 1, or even 1,000,000,000 to 1. Imagine someone telling you to find one specific grain of sand in the Sahara Desert, without telling you the region or even the country, and then stumbling across that one specific grain of sand on your first try, by pure luck, in the middle of a sandstorm, and you'll still be nowhere close, but you're starting to get an idea of just how unlikely it is. Story 17. Alzheimer's and dementia. Anything where you lose your memory or become a burden to your family. My dad has dementia, and it's a constant cycle of adapting to the new reality, and then noticing a new or enhanced symptom, and having to adapt to that. I think it feels like when old cartoon characters are walking over a cliff and keep on walking, until they realize there's nothing under their feet anymore. I love my dad. He is only in his 50s, and I don't think he'll remember who I am when I get married. He doesn't know what chess is anymore, but he can play it really well. Dementia is a weird thing. Story 18. The dark forest theory as a solution to the Fermi paradox. If the universe is so big, why haven't we detected alien life yet? Dark forest theory says that paranoid, advanced alien civilizations may find it convenient to destroy new life forms like us, simply so there's no chance we're a threat to them in the future. For an advanced alien civilization, destroying Earth would be as simple as sending an object our way at near light speed. And so the reason we haven't detected alien life yet may be because A. They've learned to advance their technology cautiously and quietly, or B. They were detected and killed off. Any day now, the various emissions of humankind may be picked up by that paranoid alien race who could be preparing to send, may have already sent, an object our way at near light speed. Story 19. It is possible that the universe exists at a false vacuum level, and at some point, any time or anywhere, vacuum decay could occur, sending a wave of destruction out in every direction. The only solace is that if it did occur, it would probably spread at no greater than the speed of light. So if it occurred in some other galaxy, humanity would be long gone before it reached here. Of course, that also means it could have already occurred in multiple places and at multiple times, and the universe is just being destroyed, bit by bit. Story 20, the Carrington Event. In 1859, the sun spewed a huge amount of highly charged plasma that brushed against the Earth's magnetosphere and caused every electronic device on Earth to receive a huge electric shock. At the time, every electronic device on Earth consisted of a few telegraph machines. Some simply ran even while disconnected from their power supply for a while. Some melted. If an event like this were to happen today, we're overdue for one. It would pretty much destroy every single electronic device, including all of the infrastructure used to generate and distribute electricity. There would be widespread blackouts everywhere, and no way to contact anyone to call for help or find out what state the rest of the world is in, and no way to fix it other than recreating centuries' worth of scientific advancements by hand. Story 21. There is no upper limit on psychological pain. A person on fire will eventually pass out from the extensive damage and physical pain, but a person has no upper limit on anxiety, fear, depression, hopelessness, grief, worry, and so forth. What is more, we act as if there is a clear division between physical and psychological pain, but all pain is psychological. We have a nervous system, in part, so we can learn to avoid pain. This doesn't seem accurate to me. People pass out from fear all the time, and depression numbs people to their pain. And in general, very intensely painful emotions actually kind of move in waves. Plus, psychological pain is not really a discrete thing to begin with. I don't know. Just want to push a bit on the idea that people could hypothetically careen into an ever-escalating spiral of fear without a check or balance. Dissociation actually kind of functions in this precise way. I work in a psych unit, and even folks with extreme emotional pain kind of find a baseline for themselves most of the time, even if it doesn't look like others' baselines. Story 22. Lots of people don't just pass away quickly. A lot of times they experience their organs shutting off basically one by one. A common experience is your lungs filling with fluid and causing you to suffocate. Maybe death itself isn't too bad, as it is the ultimate peace, a release from the suffering of life. The part I'm most afraid of is the process of dying and what it will all feel like. If I'm old, and at the point where doctors are certain I cannot live much longer, I hope they come up with something that's not totally agonizing. Since that is many, many years in the future, it'll hopefully go smoothly with advancements in medicine and tech. Story 23. The fact that everyone literally has a 50-50 chance of getting some form of cancer at some point in their lives, and that there's an additional 50-50 chance you'll die from it. I am a hypochondriac anyway, but I've always been terrified of cancer from the day I learned what it was, especially because so many of them can be silent until you find a lump, and then suddenly you have months, weeks, days to live. It's unfair that you can literally be the healthiest you can possibly be, take care of every inch of your body, and not even have cancer in your family. But it doesn't matter. You can get it anyway. I truly feel like it's nature's cruelest way of controlling our population, almost like the Thanos of the universe. Story 24. False vacuum decay. We think the current vacuum state of the universe is stable, but there is a possibility that it is not stable. If at any location in the universe the vacuum state were to decay to a more stable state, it would destroy the universe. A shockwave traveling at the speed of light would expand outward and reset the vacuum state of everything it engulfed. Matter would disintegrate. And since it would be traveling at the speed of light, we wouldn't see it coming. We'd be going about our lives, and as the shockwave passed, we would suddenly longer exist in any form. There is no way to stop this if it happened, and we wouldn't even know it was happening until it hit us. Story 25. Huntington's disease is a rare genetic disease that is basically eating the brain out with no cure. Life expectancy is 15 to 20 years after diagnosis with severe mental conditions. To make matters even worse, this allele is dominant, always expressed if present, and is always passed to the children, so people with Huntington's cannot have children unless they harm them. Edit. It happens as a result of a mutation of a specific gene, so it may happen to anyone randomly. The odds are extremely low, though. Story 26. A single large nuclear weapon, if detonated at the right height in our atmosphere, could burn out every computer chip, every electrical transmission line, and every electrical component connected to any antenna or length of wire in over half of the United States. Instead of the Stone Age, half the USA would revert to the late 19th century. In an instant. The existence and effect of electromagnetic pulse, EMP, electrical surge from an atmospheric nuclear blast, is well known and not debated. Imagine every cell phone, ATM, car computer chip, Peloton, POS terminal, traffic signal, GPS, and Wi-Fi device was suddenly bricked and rendered useless. Imagine the entire electrical grid vaporized, and every power pole transformer blown to bits. Imagine not just the time and effort needed to repair downed power lines, but the time and manufacturing needed to replace every burnt-out transformer and power line necessary to rebuild an electric grid from scratch. Imagine a city without power. No sewage pumps, no tap water pumps, no police or fire radios, no streetlights, no ambulance radios, no computers to direct banks to pay vendors, no public service vehicles operational because they all rely on computer chips that are burned out. And imagine that there are no trucks to bring in what's needed. Transformers, power line wire, food, insulin, baby formula, bandages, newspapers, water, replacement parts, vegetables, light bulbs, or cell phone tower electronics. The unbridled rioting, chaos, and violence that would follow scares me to my bones. Story 27. A massive pontine stroke, usually fatal, and when not, survived with only some general loss of motor function. But occasionally a stroke in the pons region completely disconnects higher brain functions from the body, leaving the victim fully conscious but unable to produce any movement at all. The person is completely neurologically locked, can't even blink except by reflex, but is fully aware and undamaged cognitively. This gets missed from time to time, is assumed brain dead, and the victim will be put into care, fed, and hydrated for decades. There, they would never be sedated or otherwise helped, screaming inside their own skulls.
Story 1. There is a gravitational anomaly in space called the Great Attractor, which is pulling everything within the Virgo and Hydra Centaurus superclusters towards it. It lies 150 to 250 million light-years from the Milky Way, which itself is being pulled towards it too. The scary part is that relative to us, the anomaly lies within the same plane as our own galaxy, making it very difficult to observe. Essentially, we have almost no concrete idea of what it is. Story 2. If your dog swims in a lake after receiving a spot on flea treatment, it absolutely decimates the invertebrate population. A large dog swimming in 8 Olympic swimming pools worth of water soon after treatment will leach enough neurotoxin to kill 50% of the lake's invertebrate population within 48 hours. There's some awareness of this, but it's not being taken seriously enough. Edit. I need to add, when I say after, I mean relatively soon after, within say a day, to have an effect quite this devastating. The leaching does reduce over the month, but it's still there, and the effect of multiple dogs still allows for a terrible buildup of chemicals. Story 3. Scientific literature conclusions on Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases in general is that the diseases start decades before the first obvious symptoms, and that we need to treat them at that stage. When you exhibit obvious symptoms, it's too late. Your brain is already mush. If you get diagnosed with Alzheimer's at 65, you had the disease since your early 40s at least, and you experienced very mild symptoms but didn't notice. And your brain fought like hell to compensate the deficit. When you get diagnosed, your brain is already very severely damaged and will never recover from the deficit. Story 4. Cancer geneticist here. Most cases of cancer that are sequenced generally just denote the prognosis of how long a patient has to live, rather than treatment options. People always say, let's cure cancer, however this simplifies cancer as though it is only one disease. It's far more complicated than that. I studied at one of the largest cancer hospitals in the world where the motto is to make cancer history, but the only obtainable goal is to make it chronic. We study and research as much as possible, but every cancer requires different research, and unfortunately the powers that be often prohibit funding and proficient research. It's work I am passionate about, but also a broken system that is infuriating to work in. Story 5. I've got 3 for you. 1. Rabies. Once symptomatic, rabies has a 100% fatality rate. The only options are the rabies vaccine and immunoglobulin therapy, which, again, must be administered before any symptoms. 2. Gamma ray bursts, henceforth referred to as GRBs. GRBs are a rare phenomenon emitted from the poles of rapidly spinning supernovae and hypernovae. In the event of a direct hit from suitably close, which is actually really far, all life on Earth would be wiped out. The facing side would be annihilated instantly, while the trailing side would quickly die due to the conditions on Earth no longer being suitable to support life, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. 3. Runaway global warming. There are many stores of greenhouse gases, namely carbon dioxide and methane, all over the place. But the conditions required to keep these gases trapped are delicate. The worst part? It may already be too late to stop, even if humanity immediately ceased all greenhouse gas emissions and put every single resource we have into carbon sequestration. Story 6. I'm in the UK. About 17% of people have fetal alcohol syndrome. As much as 17% of us are developmentally disabled simply because, prior to the late 90s, a large proportion of British mothers drank during pregnancy, 41%. Thankfully, the prevalence rate has been falling fast since the late 90s when all this research was published, but it's terrifying to see how much of an effect FASD is having on society. Story 7. Haven't seen this one yet. Insects are going extinct. We have lost a significant chunk since the 80s. I think it was around 20%. Mozzies are going up, because of course, but just about everything else is going. Wasn't until I read this that I realized that as a kid in the 90s, I used to see butterflies all the time, dragonflies. My house used to get invaded by Christmas beetles every year. Not so much. These days, I might see only 1 or 2 Christmas beetles in December, if any at all. When I was a kid, I remember finding 8 in my house in a single night. Same house. Story 8. The Cascadia Subduction Zone, CSZ, runs off the coast of northern California to southern Canada and ruptures about every 250 to 350 years. We know this from the geological record. The last rupture was in January 1700, and there were written records from Japan of a tsunami that resulted from an earthquake on the other side of the Pacific. This zone is still active and is likely to rupture in the next 100 years, resulting in a Mag 9 plus earthquake that impacts the west coast from northern Cali to southern Canada. Edit. These massive earthquakes along subduction zones are called megathrust earthquakes. Story 9. Prions. Misfolded proteins that cause a cascade of protein misfoldings that lead to amyloid plaque buildups, resulting in uncontrollable neurodegeneration that is fatal in 100% of cases within 2 years. There is no cure. We don't understand what causes it. We don't understand the mechanism of the misfolding cascade. We don't even fully understand the structure of the misfolded proteins. It could in theory happen to anyone, at any time, and there's no way to tell until you start showing symptoms, at which any point might give you 18 months to live. If you're lucky, the last 6 of which will be intensely unpleasant. Story 10. Some forms of anesthesia don't numb you to pain, they make you forget that you felt it. That reminds me of that early anesthetic for children didn't actually stop pain and just paralyzed them. The doctors didn't believe the kids describing the pain, and it wasn't until a child of a doctor was able to recount in detail the medical procedure and how he was cut up and what caused the pain that they stopped using it. This is all form memory from a college neuroscience class, so I don't recall the specifics. Story 11. I don't know if I'd call it science per se, or call myself a scientist. But I'm a formal funeral director, and one of the first things you learn in your actual funeral science classes is that people over a certain body fat percentage will start a literal grease fire in your crematory oven if you don't bake them at a proper temperature and duration. Cold start, low and slow is key. Story 12. Everyone knows about scurvy, but the reason it's so terrifying is usually less known. You see, scar tissue is not permanent. The process to build and maintain scar tissue is constantly ongoing. When you become vitamin C deficient, your scar tissue starts being reabsorbed by your body, opening up any and all old wounds. If you had ever had surgery, those internal incisions would open back up. Fortunately, it doesn't take a lot of vitamin C, and it's abundant in our food sources. But it's still a little creepy that you could just start falling apart without it. Edit. FYI, too much vitamin C can lead to stomach cancer. Vitamin C is basically citric acid, so eating a ton of acid regularly is bad. Story 13. Soil science adjacent researcher here. We are degrading, polluting, and losing our topsoil at such a rate that we may not be able to produce enough food to feed everyone within 50 to 60 years, let alone what impacts climate change may bring to bear on our food supply. And the US government's crop insurance programs and incentives all reinforce that bad practice, while discouraging regenerative practices. These bad policies are extremely hard to change because of lobbying from the major agribusiness companies, who make money off of these short-sighted policies. Our food supply is further threatened by our agricultural overdependence on aquifer water, which is not being replenished, making it an unsuitable source of water. If the aquifers are overdrawn, depleted, or polluted, we hit a hard wall of water scarcity and will have no backups to address the problem with. The drawdown of the aquifers also causes land subsidence, which causes costly infrastructure and building damage. The general public does not realize the impending crisis that will be caused by the confluence of these factors. Story 14. Here's a few scary medical science facts regarding CPR that you won't often hear in your first aid/CPR class put on in school. I only learned this stuff after schooling to become an EMT. What's the success rate of CPR? The average person assumes 75% or greater. In reality, it's barely 10%. It's one of the first things they told us in training because all new people have way too high of an expectation to the effectiveness of CPR. It can be very depressing when you're doing everything you were trained and aren't getting the results you think you should be getting. The time from collapse to administration of a shock via AED is absolutely paramount. They say the chances of survival drop 10% per minute. Oh, and rescue breaths. If you're not being very, and I mean very careful, you'll cause gastric dissension. You'll literally be blowing up their stomach, and they will vomit. Then there's the cracks and crackles. If done right, it'll sound and feel like you're breaking every rib in little old lady Nelson's chest. You're likely not, it's cartilage and other bits shifting. Although if you're a bit too vigorous, you may very well break a rib or two. But hey, they're already dead, so it doesn't matter. They'd rather be alive with a broken rib than dead. Story 15. If you live in the Netherlands and your house is older than let's say 100 years and you have not renovated your plumbing, chances are fairly high that you can get lead poisoning. It is impossible for water treatment companies to pinpoint where they are and how many, and many building plans do not include the plumbing schematics. So check your pipes for lead. They can do harm, especially to children. Story 16. Phosgene is a gas whose lethal dose is 5 times the detection threshold when you can smell it, and it smells like freshly cut grass, supposedly. This is super important if you are a welder or amateur welder. Do not use brake cleaner on rusted metal if you intend to weld it. Welders use electrical currents to create arcs which superheat metal. If there is brake cleaner/residue on the metal, it will create enough phosgene gas to kill you instantly. Wire wheels exists for a reason. Use them. Story 17. Most cosmetic items that say they contain ingredients like different plant extracts have just enough to say that it's there, but not enough to actually help you. Like a few grams in a batch, that's a couple thousand gallons. If it isn't an FDA-regulated component, like for example salicylic acid in a shampoo for people with dandruff, there is literally nothing stopping companies from putting virtually undetectable amounts of ingredients into stuff just to be able to say it's there. Story 18. Topsoil loss is pretty scary for the medium long term. This glosses over heterogeneity, e.g., we're burning through soil in the Midwest much faster than other parts of the US. Interestingly enough, a lot of damage from the Dust Bowl is still in place, but we're relying on more input-intensive methods to eke out results. Fertilizer runoff is also causing an anoxic dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. The nutrients feeds algae, which has a population explosion and rots en masse. Some are holding out for usable soil opening up at high altitudes, e.g. Canada, Siberia, with climate change, but at least near term that isn't too promising given that it will generally be poorer soil, e.g. less phosphate, and melting permafrost won't be too reliable for quite a while. While vertical farming and the like is making advances, as I understand it, most of what's practical to grow tends to be inefficient calorie-wise. Story 19. Antibiotics have been abused and misused for so long that various bacteria strains have started to get resistant to them. What used to be a treatable infection might soon become deadly because we are unable to treat it with the antibiotics we have today. There is research to try and find other ways to treat antibiotic-resistant bacteria, but until then, please use prescribed antibiotics until they are finished, not until you feel better. If unused, do not flush them down the toilet or put them in the bin. Give it to a pharmacy so they can discard them correctly. And use antibiotics when necessary. Some countries give them willy-nilly while others are more conservative. Story 20. Humans rely on evaporating sweat to stay cool. If humidity gets too high, relatively low heat can kill humans. The equivalent of 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 degrees Celsius, at 100% relative humidity can kill even healthy humans. This is called a wet bulb event. By 2050, scientists predict multiple wet bulb events in the North China Plain. Approximately 400 million people live in the North China Plain. Story 21. Helium. Fun for party balloons. Everyone likes a squeaky voice. Except helium is a vital component of various high-tech devices such as MRIs. Helium is also light enough that the Earth's gravity cannot contain it, and we are running out. Not today, not tomorrow, but we are frivolously wasting it when we should be jealously hoarding it, and eventually we won't have any left, and a lot of our wonderful technology will suddenly stop working. Story 22. The human genome is riddled with mutations. Some were passed down from your parents, some occur during DNA replication, and others as a result of DNA damage from the environment, smoking, UV light, etc. Most of these mutations are harmless. Some will be repaired, some won't, but others will be in cancer suppressor genes or OSA genes. In fact, you may have cancerous cells growing in your body right now. Story 23. During World War II, when America was working on the first nuclear bombs, they hadn't finalized the maths on whether or not a nuclear explosion would cause an ongoing reaction with the atmosphere, thereby igniting it and eradicating Earth. Story 24. In Canada, there are many buildings under design for snow loads due to being designed under the previous revisions of the building code. Snowdrift loading due to different height roofs, large RTUs, or solar panels, etc. were not factored into the design for the roof structures. A lot of jobs tend to increase in scope after an analysis of the roof capacity is performed. Story 25. A particle found in the core of a neutron star can convert normal matter into what is called strange matter, and it can infect all matter in the universe because it can exist outside of neutron stars. A single particle is enough to change Earth into an unrecognizable planet, along with us. Story 26. Botox is made from botulinum toxin. The toxin is produced by the bacterium Clostridium botulinum and is considered to be one of the most poisonous, lethal substances known to mankind. The toxin is a neurotoxin that blocks nerve signals to muscles. Consequently, it prevents muscles injected with Botox from contracting, tensing, so they become weak or paralyzed, thus improving the appearance of wrinkles and fine lines. Fortunately, though, Botox is only injected in small, targeted doses and is considered extremely safe as long as it's made and provided by a licensed professional. Story 27. A repeat of an earlier post, but damn does it fit so well. The original nuclear bombs leveled the cities they detonated over, yet are considered puny in today's standards. The most powerful nuclear bomb ever created, the Tsar Bomba, had an explosive yield 3,000 times more powerful than the original nuclear bombs, and its power was calculated to be more than 10 times the combined power of every single munition used in World War II. That includes every bullet fired, every grenade thrown, every artillery shell fired, every bomb dropped, and of course, the 2 nuclear bombs dropped. It was detonated 4 kilometers from the ground over the remote Severny Island, yet still completely destroyed towns within a couple hundred kilometers of the blast, and broke windows as far away as Copenhagen, Denmark. The shockwave from the blast circled the globe 9 times. The plane that dropped it was given a 50-50 chance of survival, yet the bomb was originally designed to be twice as powerful. Story 28. Our food is becoming less nutritious. Plants take in CO2 gas and convert that into carbohydrates through photosynthesis. The increase in atmospheric CO2 concentration we have caused means that plants are producing more carbohydrates, sugars, and structural carbs like cellulose. However, the mineral, micronutrition, and protein content of plants is not increasing. Plants today contain more carbs than plants 100 years ago, generally. This may be a contributing factor to the obesity epidemic, since more total calories need to be consumed in order to reach total nutrient requirements. Story 29. There are some destinations in space that are considered dead ends, where the expansion of the universe between you and them is so great that even traveling at the speed of light, you'll never reach your destination. Worse, you can't turn back after a certain point, because home is receding faster than you can fly to. You're just trapped in an endless void between 2 unreachable destinations forever, and no one will ever be able to reach you for the exact same reason. Story 30. Well, I'm not a scientist, but I have an interesting one about the New Madrid Fault. In 1812, it faulted, causing the Mississippi to flow north for a short time. When there's an earthquake in that area that is substantial, it shakes the river plain. The river plain is more like jello than solid land. This causes it to come loose, resulting in sand blows. If you're ever in an area, you can still see areas of sand that have been pushed up for these. There's also Indian legends of this fault being active, so it's odd it's been dormant for so long. Story 31. I keep wondering why so many people, including in this post, are scared of cosmic changes that might eradicate life, Earth, and all existence in an instance, such as vacuum decay. Like, if it ever happens, we will never know about it. We won't see it coming, and we won't actively experience it or anything after, since when it happens, it's already over. Aren't the scary things you actually have to deal with, like lasting disease or social collapse, rather than an instant wipeout that doesn't really concern anyone anymore the moment it's done? Story 32. Physical oceanography. The world's climate is driven by the meridional overturning circulation, what you might have heard as the global conveyor belt. Essentially, this is the formation of cold and salty deep water masses near the poles, North Atlantic, Antarctica, that sinks to the bottom of the oceans, that then upwells in regions like the Indian Ocean and subtropical Pacific. No deep water formation, no upwelling, no deep water formation, no movement of heat on a larger scale, theoretically, in the oceans. The heat capacity of the oceans is orders of magnitude greater than that of the atmosphere. If that heat isn't moving around, the world's climate rapidly changes. Thanks to the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, there's going to be a lot fresher water in the North Atlantic. No salty water. No deep water formation. No deep water formation. No conveyor belt. No conveyor belt. No Gulf Stream. Or anything else driven by geostrophic motion. Climate apocalypse. Have fun. Story 33. The Yellowstone caldera has migrated over millions of years due to tectonic plates moving. This has left a giant scar across all of southern Idaho that can be seen from space. You can see it for yourself on Google Earth. It shows just how big the caldera is and a small idea of how bad an eruption would be. Honestly, nothing is more creepy than how deep-sea anglerfish mate. The deep sea is dark, and the anglerfish are spread very thinly. Therefore, when an anglerfish meets another anglerfish, it's incredibly important that they get the chance to mate over and over again. The evolutionary strategy that deep-sea anglerfish devised is extra creepy. The male latches onto the female, biting her and never letting go. That way he can inseminate the eggs she drops. Not that bad so far, right? But wait, how does he eat if he's latched onto his mate? Well, the circulatory system fuse and the female provides nutrients for the male through the fused circulatory system. The true horror starts here. The organs of the male start to wither and atrophy, being absorbed into the female. Eventually, the male is reduced to a lump of testicles the female uses to fertilize their eggs. Females are often covered in bumps of several males that have melted into the female, becoming a literal body horror lump of meat on the female. If you believe strongly enough that you have been cursed, your brain can shut itself off entirely in severe cases. The psychological term for it is voodoo death syndrome. It's just the fact you can literally think yourself to death that unsettles me so. Our brains are fascinating. If we believe strongly enough that something is real, our bodies respond accordingly. In the same vein as your example, the same phenomenon happens to women who desperately want to be pregnant. Their bellies will swell, their menstrual periods will stop, their breasts will become sore and enlarged, and they'll develop morning sickness. That so many vegetables come from the same plant. Broccoli, kale, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, etc. They are, botanically speaking, the same species. Humans have just bred them to emphasize different traits. Buds, leaves, tubers. Imagine if humans were genetically flexible. Imagine a person walking around with giant toes, but otherwise normal. Actually, plant genetics in general is a weird world. Mouth pipetting was a thing in labs in the 1980s. A pipette is, for simplicity's sake, a glass straw that lab staff would use to transfer liquids. Nowadays we use special bulbs that when squeezed would suck up the liquid for us, kinda like a turkey baster or eyedropper. Before we had these bulbs, lab workers used to use their mouth to suck up the liquid, which meant if they weren't careful, they'd get whatever they were sucking up into their mouth. I'm currently training to be MLAT, and those fluids would usually be urine, liquid stool, sputum, and so on. Parasites can live anywhere inside of you, for years unnoticed. A simple migraine could be a tapeworm crawling in your brain, causing damage. Your eyes begin to blur frequently, and you don't know why, and it's not getting better. Losing weight and having diarrhea, but it's not a stomach bug. Well, I guess it is. You are having a difficult time catching your breath and your chest doesn't feel right. It could just be some parasite hanging out, using you. Top 5 ways to intensify anxiety. Number 1. This post. The universe is unbelievably infinite, while simultaneously unbelievably infinitesimal. The universe has tilde 1022 stars, a rough guess. This is an unfathomably large number for humans to comprehend. But bear with me. There is roughly 100,000 million stars in our galaxy alone, and there are roughly 125 billion galaxies. A single drop of water contains tilde 1021 H2O molecules, not too far off from the number of stars in the whole universe, but contained in a single drop of water. It blows my mind that the universe can contain such mind-boggling numbers of things on such wildly different scales. There is so much to reality that the human mind just isn't capable of grasping. Years ago, I saw an episode of Monsters Inside Me, where this guy was doing something outside, and a fly flew into his eye. It only made contact for about a microsecond, but that was enough time for it to lay eggs. After they hatched, they started eating his eye from the inside, and he was starting to go blind until a doctor figured out what was wrong. Just imagine that. Getting your eye eaten from the inside and losing your sight, all because a fly was briefly made contact with you. Ever since I learned about this, I get really paranoid when there's a fly around my face because of the fact that this could possibly happen to me. Any cosmological fact is actually scary. You know, we can randomly be in the path of a gamma burst, an asteroid or something else, and we would never see it coming. You might just go to sleep today, and in the middle of the night, scientists discover a gamma ray coming at us gone. The universe doesn't stop there, it continues. Our existence is less than a galactic blink. The universe expands, and there will be a day that our planet will be floating alone in cold darkness forever. A buddy of mine is a pilot for a major airline, in top 3 of the airlines. I asked him exactly how much flying are you actually doing during a flight? Like how much are you controlling the plane? He said about 5%. 95% of a flight is completely automated. He said he's involved a little bit on the takeoff and on the landing, but for the most part the plane flies itself, unless something major happens in flight. Out of all of our DNA, only 2% codes for our genes. The 98% left over is called junk DNA. I'm not specialized in genetics, but it was long thought to be useless, but it's apparently essential for DNA expression, regulation, and protein formation. There are familial forms of Alzheimer's disease. They are very rare, but they exist. It doesn't skip a generation, and one of the form makes you have the disease as early as your late 20s or early 30s. In Auschwitz, Joseph Mengele, a Nazi doctor who conducted experiments on twins, sewed up two twins together for and giggles, and let them die after the surgery of infections. They apparently screamed of pain for days until dying. You can live normally, with half your brain removed. It's usually done on young children suffering from terrifying epilepsy, and the surgery is a last resort. It works quite well, and if done early enough, with re-education, the children develop normally without cognitive deficit. They just are blind in one eye, have one very weak arm/leg, but they are not cognitively affected. Some go to college, get married, have children, and live completely normal lives. Moose have been found dead on Isle Royale, killed by wood ticks. They got so infested, the moose suffer hypothermia. They're rubbing fur off against trees and blood loss from the ticks. How many ticks does it take to kill a 1,200-pound adult moose? Scientists there have found bodies with upwards of 30,000 ticks on them. Thanks. That will keep my skin crawling for days, resisting the urge to downvote this. Hated ticks well before this. We literally hallucinate reality. We don't see with our eyes, we see with our brains. Our eyes are just like cameras on the exterior of a windowless spaceship. Your brain is like the computer interpreting the information the cameras send to it. What makes it freaky is our brains omit or delete a lot of what our eyes see, because it is deemed irrelevant to the task at hand. The Dark Forest Theory, which explains we haven't met aliens yet, it comes from a great book by the author Liu Cixin, named The Dark Forest. The universe is a dark forest. Every civilization is an armed hunter stalking through the trees like a ghost, gently pushing aside branches that block the path and are trying to tread without sound. Even breathing is done with care. The hunter has to be careful, because everywhere in the forest are stealthy hunters like him. If he finds other life, another hunter, an angel or a demon, a delicate infant or a tottering old man, a fairy or a demigod, there's only one thing he can do: open fire and eliminate them. In this forest, hell is other people, an eternal threat that any life that exposes its own existence will be swiftly wiped out. This is the picture of cosmic civilization. It's the explanation for the Fermi paradox. I know this isn't what the question asked, but looking up at the daytime sky with nothing from the ground in your field of vision for more than a couple seconds makes my brain start to really freak out, and I lose all sense of balance and orientation. I've been trying to do this a little bit at a time. Yes, lockdown had made things weird, but still can't get used to the feeling. Oddly enough, it feels like your feet start to lift off the ground a bit. Nighttime is also weird, but more euphoric before the panic sets in. Rabies has a 100% fatality rate after symptoms appear. The only way to survive is to get immediate medical treatment, which consisted of a temporarily suppressing set of medications and an experimental, yet rather old, vaccine. If you get bitten by any kind of animal that you can't confirm had its rabies shot, go see a doctor. Call an ambulance if you can't drive there right away. I don't know how much that wee-woo wagon cost. It's better than dying a sudden and terrible death by brain-consuming pathogen. Pre-ground coffee may contain ground-up cockroaches. Yes, it's sad but true. The FDA's own studies show that up to 10% of green coffee beans, and sometimes more, become infested with roaches and other insects. They are unable to process them out completely, so they just get roasted up and ground with the beans. Along with this, proteins found in cockroach feces, regurgitates, skin and body parts are potent allergens for many people, as proven when entomologists often become actually allergic to their research subjects. Therefore, most entomologists who study cockroaches become allergic to foreground coffee. The magnetic field of objects reverse at regular intervals, including our planet. Earth is overdue for this switch. And when it does happen, we don't know exactly what will happen and can't do anything to prevent it. It's very likely that there will be extreme weather events. All power stations and most technology will break and take quite a while to fix, and animals that instinctually use the magnetic fields to navigate, birds, fish, bees, turtles, and lots of others, will be so confused that they'll likely go in the wrong direction / get lost / die. The fact that our body's immune system doesn't recognize our eyes as part of our body, so if you get an actual infection or injury in your eye, your body will do nothing. There is also another instance of where if one eye gets injured and your body somehow has a reaction to it, it may actually go after the other eye. But the creepiest part about this is the fact that your body may actually recognize your eyes as being there, not part of the body, then begin to attack due to thinking that it's a foreign object. The reason mothers' bonds is so strong with their born children is because of the hormonal onslaught that the body produces, thanks oxytocin. The baby then continues its mind-bending hypnosis into making you love it with the way it looks, giant eyes and smiles, as well as the sound of it crying being hardwired to attract the attention of the mother for feeding. So much so that a baby's cry can cause lactation in other mothers as a reflex. I'm not big into having babies, and I attribute that to the fact that their manipulation abilities freak me out so much. There is a species of spider that makes long, tunnel-like webs on the sides of trees. These webs are camouflaged with forest to breeze and not sticky. When insects land on the web, believing it to be just like any other tree, the spider bursts forth from within the web to drag the helpless insect inside. Because I can't choose just one, here's a list. We are more bacteria than human. We know less about the oceans than space. There is no end, beginning, center to the universe and beyond. It's just forever. You could just be a brain being experimented on to see if scientists can get a brain to believe it's alive. Happiness isn't a feeling, it's a chemical. To me, the last one isn't scary or unsettling, just kind of sad. Millions of years ago, there was a mass casualty event that drastically reduced the population of humans. This led us to having several different human species, Neanderthals, Denisovians, and what we call Homo sapiens. All three of these species interbred and amalgamated back into what we call modern humans. Before the age of colonialism, humans were well on their way towards splitting off into four subsets based on the exact same locations, with Caucasians for Neanderthals, Africans for Homo sapiens, and Asians for Denisovians. The fourth is Australian. They don't have a counterpart because Homo erectus never made it there. How many times did this happen? Anything to do with deep time. It makes me want to scream. The idea that nothing is permanent, that everything decays, that even things we consider as invincible will fall to dust, and that dust will fall into less than that. The way that expansion works, the way that the cosmic light horizons work, the way that orbits will decay, and that even black holes will evaporate, and that maybe even fucking protons will decay. This is a short but horrifying overview of the possibilities. It genuinely troubles me to even think about that, even if we cracked anti-aging, even if we managed to upload ourselves into computers, even if we dodge every f***ing bullet and overcome every catastrophe, the clock is always ticking down. When you're subjected to a pressure wave or sudden momentum, grenade, car crash, etc., momentum really fucks you up. Part of the reason is that your skin, blood, bones, and organs are all different densities. They're all moving a little with normal processes of the body, and they get hit with slightly different bits of the force. This means that when this happens, everything moves in a different direction. That moment after an IED goes off, and a perfectly fine Marine is looking for the arm he's sworn got blown off, is rearranging his internal organs to the proper configuration and recovering after his brain bounced off his skull like a hyperactive hamster, it can usually take years for all your squishy bits to fit comfortably again. Both the fact that every single one of us is under constant threat of a nuclear fallout, and the fact that nobody knows if free will exists, because either it does, or everything you do is predetermined by your genetics and other factors, making everyone effectively just a robot, a cog in the machine of society. No choice you make is your own, or even a choice to begin with. Your left brain and right brains are separate entities. In a normal person, they've connected themselves by an information highway called corpus callosum. However, for some who suffer severe epilepsy, a medical procedure can be performed to cut the information highway, and the two brains can no longer communicate with each other. These people describe it as having two personalities. For example, if the person reaches for something the other brain doesn't like, the other hand can reach over and slap it away. Apparently, after decapitation, the decapitated head remains conscious, however it is incredibly brief. This means, in theory, if you were decapitated in one good swing, you may briefly see your head falling to the ground before death. The thought of feeling a brief sharp pain in the neck before seeing your own head falling off your shoulders is horrifying to me. There's a weird cognitive dissonance when you have a kid, where you cannot really imagine them until they're born, and then you can't really imagine them not have existed in the past. I would have thought this was just me, but when I first visited my grandma after my first was born, she said to me, "Doesn't it feel like he's always been here?" And it was something I was aware of, but I hadn't really processed until she said it. Now with my second, I keep having to remind myself that he hadn't even been conceived yet when I think back to my previous family events, like remembering the vacation we took the month before he was conceived. My brain keeps wanting to remember him there, and I have to remind myself that he was still a gleam in his dad's eye. But while I was pregnant with him, if he wasn't moving, I would completely forget about him and be otherwise unaware, sort of like when a family member is at work or school so you don't think about them, because you know they're safe and not your responsibility, and it would freak me out because I'd fear that I was capable of forgetting my baby. After watching that documentary on Netflix, I'm pretty sure this is entirely because of my brain being programmed upon his birth to be completely preoccupied with his well-being. That one artist guy who painted or drew portraits of himself after being diagnosed with Alzheimer's to sort of document his cognitive decline. At first you can tell he's still coherent, but the portraits are oddly flat and the angles and things are subtly wrong. The years go by and the portraits turn darker and blockier. Then at the end he can't even create the semblance of a face. This was so utterly unnerving to me. Like we are hardwired to recognize faces, even in places there obviously isn't one. So like when he couldn't even create the rough structure of a face at all, it was like you just knew his humanity died. He was still alive, but he wasn't anything like the person in his mind anymore. Maybe there were fragments of memory and bits of emotion, but there was nothing coherent. I can't even imagine what it would be like to die like that. He lived several more years after his last portrait. Bedford's Law of Statistics. Everything that occurs naturally in the universe follows this law, or Bedford describes this. If you count the number of planets in each solar system in the universe, 30% will have a number starting with 1, 17% starting with 2, 12% starting with 3, and so on. This applied to almost anything in the universe. Number of ants in anthills, population in cities, pixels in image files, how many fucks you give each day of the year, and income reported in taxes. Now here's the kicker. If your tax report doesn't match with Bedford's Law, then you have lied on your tax report. Same with pixels in an image file. If the image's pixels don't match Bedford's Law, it's tampered with. It's photoshopped. Government use this law to catch tax cheaters and check voting results. Casinos use it to catch cheaters. So if anything is not following Bedford's Law, it is not following nature's flow. It did not happen organically. So you still think we have free will? Think about that. All your decisions follow this law. If not, you lie or cheat. But it also applies to how many times you cheat. I'm an electrician, and I've studied electricity for 4 years on a college level. It's crazy to consider the fact that the most widespread and complex system that is used universally around the entire world is based on an unprovable theory. We actually don't know how electricity works. Granted, we think we do, and we do what we think it does, and it works. But at the end of the day, if you ask someone who knows what they're talking about, there's a reason why it's called electron theory and not electron law.